Recently, I came into the possession of my childhood Nintendo Wii after I was able to convince my extremely kind mom to mail it to me. I knew it was floating around somewhere, and even though it has taken an absolute beating on the inside and out, like I can't even get the disk drive to work, it still boots up, so I can see what memories wait inside. I was curious to see if any gaming remnants had been hiding away on this old system. Turns out it's nothing special though, unfortunately. Mostly just the free internet-based channels that don't have service anymore. But there was one very special game of note still left on the system. Pokemon Ranch. I booted it up, and suddenly it was all coming back to me. This beautiful Gen 4 Pokemon companion service where you can store your excess Pokemon from the games, and then hang out with them on this giant farm. Even with just a few minutes on the game and hanging out with my Pokemon on the ranch, I was struck by the charm and care put into the presentation. The experience itself really holds up to the otherwise distant memory I have of this game, and so I kept at it and tried messing with it a little more before I was eventually struck by a second thing. As beautiful as it is, this is also a very frustrating game. Why can't I withdraw Pokemon from a profile that didn't store them even though they're all mine? Why can't I connect with Soul Silver? Why are there all these limits on functionality? And I know that at this point they have a handful of these types of storage games. Have they always been like this? There's a library of games and services equivalent to Ranch that this series has gradually put out over the years. Beautiful, charming games, with that same incredible emphasis on experience, but frequently posing strange challenges in the actual function of easy and seamless storage. They're just a pain sometimes. And despite these being supporting actors in the shadow of the actual series, there's a genuinely storied history here, as ever since Pokemon could be collected, there's been thought put into how they would be stored. And so today I'd like to explore that history. Let's look across the series and go on a journey through the strange and beautiful world of Pokemon storage systems, and really take a complete look at this ever-present backdrop to the main games. But if we're gonna do this all the way through, I'm probably gonna need somewhere to sit, and this current chair, which was lovingly rescued from the side of the road, is not gonna cut it. It hurts my back. So thank goodness for today's sponsor, the C7 chair by FlexiSpot, who is here to support me in my time of need. Unlike Road Chair, the C7 offers support for your back with its self-adaptive lumbar support cushion and will conform to you as you move. It's also highly adjustable in every dimension, so it can accommodate for differences in height and size. Now, I am a bit of a sloucher when it comes to my general chair use, so I especially love the C7's forward-leaning position that keeps both my posture and circulation feeling strong. I can sit up straight like I'm supposed to, but also have a firm foundation behind me. Now this is excellent. The 20-inch seat is wide enough where you could even sit cross-legged. And I absolutely do not have hip mobility issues or anything like that. I'm just not feeling it right now. But that's the beauty of it. I could sit cross-legged if I wanted to. There's also a number of color options and a choice between mesh or foam material, so you can have it exactly your way. Plus there's a 30-day free return and a 10-year warranty. Unreal. FlexiSpot sent me the chair so I could try it out, and I am seriously into it. But you know me, I'm pretty easy to please, so I had my partner Sarah, who has extremely rigorous standards, take it for a spin, and they think this thing checks out. Easy on the joints, as they'd say. Just incredible. If you're interested in getting one for yourself, you can head for my link in the description and use code C730 to get $30 off, and big thanks to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. Storage is not the most fun thing in the world. Like anyone else, I of course like having my stuff, and so the idea of storage is great. But actually doing it and maintaining it is a completely different beast. Things like packing and unpacking on a move, organizing books or clothes, even just cleaning my room, upkeep is tough. And so when it comes to Pokemon, a game about collecting that's generally supposed to be fun, you might expect the boredom of storage mechanics to eventually get out of hand. Catching and collecting Pokemon, one of the main gameplay loops of this series, will eventually require you to manage large amounts of stored creatures. Gotta catch them all, right? Or wrong, or whatever, but still catch a bunch. You're eventually going to need some sort of system to manage this collection. And it's not just a bunch of knickknacks you're throwing in a storage locker. This is an arsenal of characters and teammates that require at least some degree of constant maintenance. Whether it's just organizing your collection, trading with friends, or getting ready for a challenging battle. The player's regulation of a virtual collection like this could easily become the most tedious and unfun aspect of any playthrough, but Pokemon has gone to great lengths over the years to ensure that even the process of storage logistics like this is an experience. One that is somehow fun and charming in and of itself. And it's astounding to me, the beauty and joy that got packed into such a logistical process, from moving your collection around in the PC to full-on separate apps like Pokemon Ranch or Home. But to paint a complete picture here, we're going to need to look back at a point when storage was an extremely painful and ugly process. The first point, in fact, on our Pokemon storage journey. All the way back with the original 2 generations. In my experience as a player, one of the most difficult parts of going back and playing anything in Gen 1 or Gen 2 is dealing with the storage system. Every Pokemon Center in Kanto and Johto has a free-to-access computer that allows you to store and withdraw Pokemon and items, and this access will inevitably be a vital component of any player's journey. But it's horribly clunky, primarily text-based, and sort of a nightmare to navigate in both sets of games, getting just a tiny bit easier to use in Gold and Silver. Instead of one gigantic pool you can call and send Pokemon from, the storage systems generally all consist of little sub-pools called boxes that sort of act as folders for organizing purposes. And this is the case across all generations. It works really well in later games when the charming graphical interface is added, but using them in these text-based iterations really starts to wear on you. You have to save the game every time you want to swap boxes, something that you don't realize just how often you do until you're looking at that save menu again. And I just frankly get lost in all of the text as my collection grows larger. This is the type of system that I dread. Confusing paperwork that takes time to organize and sometimes make the process of collecting a chore before anything else. I go on this slightly angrier tangent about the Game Boy Color era storage systems because it's the starting point. To appreciate evolution and change, we should take a look at a concept's origins, and then really bask in the beauty that comes with it further down the line. It was the first time implementing a pretty ambitious system. Pokemon aren't just other RPG party members like in Final Fantasy or the critically acclaimed Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. They're also kind of hybridized as pets, and you're supposed to collect tons of them. They had to figure out what worked from scratch, and I really respect that process. All of the difficulties may also have just been the fault of the original Game Boy's limitations, as Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2 for the N64 offer a significantly easier to use and visually pleasing storage system that can interface with the original sets of games. It's very similar to the built-in systems we'll see down the road. Not to mention it's rocking those awesome low-poly models for the original 251, so overall it's a very pleasant tool in dealing with my existing frustrations. I also want to appreciate how even in its very first iteration, Pokemon was willing to earnestly justify a storage system like this in the universe itself. It isn't presented as some amorphous menu or pocket space that just exists as another video game-ism. They baked it into the core story and made it a part of the universe's world building. It's not just the case for earlier generations either. Story and context is assigned to the storage system in some way in nearly every iteration of the main series. They've built an entire canon revolving around the storage network and its associated characters specifically. It's the surprise work of art, and they didn't have to. Not really, at least. It could all exist like any other video game menu or background process does. Somewhere on the border of the game's reality where the characters can't see it, even though players can interact with it. But Pokemon goes the extra mile to make complete sense of this concept. In Kanto and Johto, there's a relatively deeply explored network administrator in this guy Bill, who manages the storage system, and he's designed the infrastructure that allows for Pokemon to be stored digitally, and you're required to meet with him on the course of your journey. You can't get past a certain point without going to his house so he can give you a ticket for a boat ride. And at the base mechanical level, this is just an additional fetch quest between gyms, one that might even feel like a waste of time. But I find it really fascinating, and take a certain amount of solace in the fact that Pokemon makes you talk to this guy and introduces all these other characters just because they want to develop this world. They give the player in-game answers to questions that might be bugging them about this process. When I catch Pokemon and they go to the PC, where do they actually go? Are they safe? Is this just the void? Is it like a farm? Or are they actually in the computer somehow? Who's in charge of this whole operation? Who built this system in the first place? And thanks to this character inclusion, this is a finite concept built into the game's story with those explanations you may have been searching for. And that much, at least, surrounds me with beauty. Because while maybe the interface wasn't awesome, it improved quickly, and they still made it into an experience in the way that counts. They capitalized on the monotony of a menu and made it into something I can consider real. Bill is a real guy. He made a real thing that's really part of my journey, and it makes the world all that much deeper. This mini plot thread will then continue throughout the generations, with different network administrators building on the story of Pokemon's web infrastructure. Lynette from the Hoenn region modded Bill's system to be more graphical and user-friendly. Bill sent Cassius out to the Kalos region to manage the system there, just as a few instances of that progression. And I think this is a fantastic example, an ultimate follow-through of this double-edged sword that often comes with the interactive art form of video games. You get to access new and inventive devices for storytelling, and types of interaction that aren't available anywhere else. And the player gets to be in the story, rather than just perceive it. But on the other side of that, there's now an additional onus placed on immersion, and while they're definitely little things, more meta concepts like menus and logistics hurt that immersion, even if just a tiny bit. We're all very used to those video game isms at this point though, so they don't do much damage if any at all, and it's all the better if they're sleek and stylish. But I find myself the most charmed when these unavoidable elements of interaction are completely integrated with the storytelling process. Like how the menu in Luigi's Mansion is accessed via the Game Boy Horror, a handheld device invented by the game's professor that Luigi actually carries with him. It's such a charming extra detail that throws spice on that game. And it's certainly a minor thing, but it's little details like this that let me feel like I can sink so deeply into these universes. And from the start, Pokemon's storage system has been one of those for me and continues the feeling to this very day. And this is especially awesome because the integration stayed intact while the system got prettier to look at while emphasizing usability. And once you experience Gen 3 and beyond, there's really no going back. This graphics-based version is something they really nailed on the first try. Sure, there's lots of additional bonuses added over the generations, but there's a good reason the base visuals generally look the same on the Switch as they did on the Game Boy. Getting to manage your boxes of charming sprites and characters just feels fun. I can grab them with my little glove, move them all around however I feel fit, give the boxes little wallpapers, and make it feel more like a home for everybody. It's such a caring experience from this point onward. And the bells and whistles just continue to multiply once it went visual. Sound design rocks as well. Those little beeps and boops live deep in my soul. I think the only footnote I would attach to this otherwise rave review is that when things move to the Switch, and this seems to be sort of a trend with Nintendo at large, the menus and logistics lost some of their charm in favor of something more plain. Still pretty good, but starting in Sword and Shield, it all just got a bit more sanitized. Still good and more functional than ever, but I can't say I'm not disappointed with the loss of some personality in a place that's so perfect for it. I'd say that about sums up my thoughts on Pokemon storage actually in the games themselves. So now, what about storage outside of the games? When storage is the game, even. This is when things started really getting spicy, as starting in Gen 3, the storage systems evolved into their own, complete games. Separate entities that have total compatibility with their main series counterparts. An external storage system for all your storage systems. It's a brilliant idea. Following the release of Ruby and Sapphire, which bumped up the number of Pokemon to 386, Pokemon Box would come out for the GameCube. Being boasted is a massive linked storage system that could act as a single interface for your collections in Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Fire Red, and Leaf Green, with a whopping 1,500 additional storage slots. And I think this was a very proactive idea for the time. Gen 3 made the Pokemon world much bigger than it was before. They were closing in on 400 unique species while also adding all this complexity to the process of building out a Pokemon. So I think shifting their focus to the sort of hub world storage interface offered by Pokemon Box was a very forward-thinking idea. They ended up with a whole library of games just in this generation alone, so it was perfect timing for something like this. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Pokemon Box has a lot of problems, but most of these come in the form of implementation rather than the presentation. It had an extremely limited release in the US, so now it's a $1,500 game. Awesome. And then it's got all these restrictions on using it to its full extent. Like you have to beat the main story in Emerald before you can connect the cartridge to Box, and then also the post-game too for Fire Red and Leaf Green. Yeah, there are numerous annoying hurdles to clear that can make this process extremely clunky. But despite all of that bad that can make Box really hard to use for its intended purpose of being a storage manager, there's still just something about it that I can't help but love. It could have just been a glorified spreadsheet, but instead, there's this magic to it that further extends this beautiful world. You've got Lanette's sister Bridget managing this storage system, and she'll chat with you in her lab as you manage your Pokemon. You can see her lab space in the background, and she's clearly busy with lots of Pokemon research. You can see a bunch of tabs open on her computers, and she'll even give you special event eggs with exclusive Pokemon inside when you reach certain storage benchmarks. It really means a lot to me that she's here. Like this game cares that I'm having an in-world experience, even with something so on the side. In addition to this extra dose of personality, my favorite thing that Box has is this little display mode where you can build custom dioramas starring all your stored Pokemon. It's really rewarding to play with this as a toy once you've garnered a large collection. Your Pokemon appear on little stands that can be stylized and positioned to make for a myriad of unique displays. It reminds me of the trophy display game mode in Smash Bros, which was weirdly also one of my favorite things to mess around with in that game too. But hey, can you blame me? First thing I want to do after I collect a bunch of stuff like this is show it off. I gotta set up my toys. So it's really cool that Box included this. I feel like it demonstrates a core understanding of one of the reasons we might collect things. You know, even if it's just for us, it's simply fun to set it all up and show off your hard work. And these beautiful aspects of Box would only continue to flourish in the following generation's Pokemon Ranch, the Gen 4 storage service that uniquely modeled the process through having all of your deposited Pokemon living on a farm together. In lieu of a physical release, Ranch was available for $10 as digital content you would download from the Wii Shop channel. Digital was definitely the right move for something like this at the time, with Ranch being more of an app than a complete game. And it also very much leaned into the wireless play and communication the whole generation was based around. You just send your Pokemon over from the DS using local connectivity. And this idea for storage, this world, this setting, it's peak. What else could I call it? It's a complete actualization of having a Pokemon collection. All of my pets and teammates live on a farm with me, and I get to check in on their antics whenever I feel like it. And you get to be a part of the world itself this time around for another fun little touch. You, the person playing the game, will have a me that roams the farm with the Pokemon and gets to play a part in the process. Now admittedly, there isn't a ton of interactivity that comes with that element, but there's like a sort of security that comes with seeing myself actually there. So I don't know, I just really enjoy it. It feels really personal. The farm is owned and run by this fun character Haley, who is a friend of Diamond and Pearl's network administrator Bibi, so they kept with the trend of characterizing the storage space into the main universe. Haley's here watching over the farm space, giving you little quests to bring in Pokemon she's interested in seeing, upgrading the land when you bring in enough new species, and even offering you trades sometimes for ultra rare Pokemon. She is notably one of the few sources across the entire series for an untimed Mew, as she's willing to trade you one once you have 999 Pokemon stored. Altogether, while Ranch does a lot of the same stuff as Box, this iteration leaned much harder into all the fun things you could see with a massive collection of pets. And the game can almost feel like Nintendogs in some ways, watching your Pokemon amble around the farm and interact with each other. I really like it when a land-bound Pokemon takes a ride on one who can fly. Like this is probably a life-changing experience for them, and I got to witness this beautiful moment. So the only major issues again come in the implementation. Maybe it was hastily released or something, but the base game only has support for Diamond and Pearl, and it can't connect to Platinum, Heart Gold, or Soul Silver, which is especially unfortunate as those are the usual Gen 4 vehicles of choice. There was a Platinum patch released exclusively in Japan, but that was the full extent of the compatibility, so overall, really not great. And there are also a small handful of those storage limitations like the ones in Box, like a profile can't withdraw any Pokemon that they didn't deposit themselves. I guess it was maybe an attempt at anti-cheat or trying to keep people from an unfair advantage, but if you have multiple carts or like restarting your saves, it's just a giant pain to interact with the game, so I think they really overstepped here. And as a WiiWare title, Ranch is unfortunately unable to be downloaded straight from the source since the Wii Shop channel closed in 2019. It's not an online game, so it's still fully functional, but unlike Box, you can't just go pop it in your system and get to work. You're gonna have to figure something out for getting on the game, like tracking down a Wii that still has it installed. But despite the issues, I still find it to be a lovely and beautiful piece of history for the series, because the base premise of a farm is fun storage done perfectly. They nailed the idea with this one. Pokemon need to be stored in some way, but they're also beloved friends, so a farm space where they can roam freely and lovingly interact with each other is perfect. Minus all the annoying logistical choices, this is the right idea. The game is somehow a beautiful intersection of accounting and fun. I love it. Now, despite the rustic charm and more homely feel of Ranch, you could consider this game the beginning of the more modern Pokemon era. It's the beginning of these creatures getting more wireless and more online, so it's a sign of things to come. Gen 5 didn't really have a larger system like the ones we've seen up until this point, but it must have been because they were gearing up for something big with Gen 6, which finally brings us to the true modern, Pokemon on the cloud. Pokemon Bank would hit the scene late 2013, early 2014 range, and it offered a storage space that would ultimately cover every Pokemon game that could connect with the 3DS. You got a whopping 3,000 slots for Pokemon storage across a total of 18 games that had compatibility with the service. It was a real one-stop shop for only $5 a year. Pokemon Bank worked extremely well as a storage platform and seems to have had all of the restrictive nonsense in prior titles stripped away, making this one of the most usable titles in this genre so far. But that's kind of the full extent though. It's pretty bare bones in terms of that experience factor, unfortunately. We've got Bridget back as the network admin to coach you through the game's menus, then the visuals are sleek and smooth around the edges, and the music sounds sort of ethereal, but there's nothing beyond that like in the days of old. It feels sort of weird to have complaints with something that does exactly the job it said it would, and it's the job I want it to do. But I guess it's sort of business-like in a way. Like it feels like something I would use in conjunction with Microsoft Teams. It's way more spreadsheet than previous installments. I don't know, I'm just sort of perplexed by it. The worst part definitely has to be how this service facilitates the transfer chain from Gen 5 up to Gen 6 and beyond. And it looks like Pokemon Bank will be going offline relatively soonish, and everything from the generations prior will be locked out of that official transfer method. And if you want to learn about the intricate ramifications of that, you can check out one of the 100 videos that somehow always gets on my recommended about the Pokemon you're going to miss out when Bank closes. Beyond the confines of the 3DS, Pokemon Bank can transfer up to our final stop on Pokemon Home, the cloud-based hub for all things Pokemon Gen 8 and beyond. Released in 2020 with builds for the Switch and mobile phones with both free and premium plans, Home acts as a near universal platform, much more than just an individual storage unit. In the context of the series at large, there's definitely a lot more than usual to discuss with Pokemon Home. The title has been very divisive at times, and also paired poorly with the series' departure from a complete Pokédex. And it can feel extremely restrictive at times, so I definitely get it. But I don't intend to beat that discussion into the ground any further. So let's just close out here by looking at the ways it delivers on our overall theme. What does it give in terms of experience? And it's pretty good. I would say I'm relatively charmed by Home's presentation. It definitely nails a feeling for a communication hub or very pretty spreadsheet manager. The graphics are all very rounded and soft feeling. The music is twinkly and melodic, and it's extremely well organized this time around. I feel like I'm the network administrator managing all these Pokemon, and Grand Oak is just hanging out with me. He's still a cool guy though. And maybe this is just me, but I like the mobile version significantly more than the one on the Switch for all the little bells and whistles it adds, because this is really a hub. You can trade, you've got this little room with all this custom profile styling and a Pokemon hanging out with you, and there are all these little statistics and achievements being presented to you. So for what it's worth, I like it a lot. But I also think you would be completely valid in your opinion of liking Bank, or any of the previous options prior a lot more because of all the problems baked into Home's logistical design, which in full is the very strange double-edged sword they've been running with the entire time. The common theme across every Pokemon storage interface is a good, or at least pretty good, experience and presentation. The negatives have always been to do with the actual storage itself. Sometimes the actual meat of this process is very unfriendly, and that is such a fascinating dichotomy to consistently have, because these aren't your traditional art pieces like the main games are. You know, maybe a game lacks or didn't think about some deeper mechanical nuance and ultimately comes with some more frustrating features, but it can get by on simple fun with atmosphere and heart. But here we have one of gaming's most logistical processes, something you could cynically consider glorified menus and spreadsheets, but with the the experience factor cranked up to 11, and the actual lack in those more baseline mechanics. And it's rightfully one of the least likely places that you'd ever stop and smell the roses. Like, the only thing I care about when I go to the bank is depositing or withdrawing money, not how nice it looks inside. But despite that fact, I often find that it's still one of the nicest kept places in town. And so maybe, just maybe, my experience was a little bit better because of that detail. All of which is to say, there seems to be beauty in every corner of this wonderful Pokemon universe. As long as we slow down and look for it, there's really something to behold here. This has been a wondrous look back at Pokemon's many storage systems, and I'll see you next time. Droomish out.